Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Office Hours. This is episode 55 of Office Hours. Welcome to it. Office Hours is a live Game Master advice show. You go to my website, www.adam-koval.com. There's an Office Hours link up at the top. Click that bad boy. You can fill out the form, record your voice, or, like one of our callers today did, have a robot record it for you. And then go ahead and just click the submit link. It will be added to the great and mighty database from which I pluck questions to answer. But before we get started today on the questions, I actually want to follow up on something that I missed from the last episode. So, in episode 54, we talked a bit about, thanks to Ash and her question, we talked a bit about how games handle things like race and gender in a problematic way and how you can work around that. And while the question touched directly on disability, I somehow managed to totally blank on it. That's on me. That's something I have a blind spot for disability as an element of marginalization, and that's kind of crappy. And I wanted to give some room on this episode to kind of make up for missing up on the last time. And I think I have a thing or two to say about how games handle disability / how we might, as game masters, handle it ourselves at the table. Now, in this particular area, I acknowledge that I'm not the most necessarily educated person in the world, right? I'm going to try to talk about this from the perspective of role-playing games primarily. My experience is one of an able-bodied person, and while I can try and do, good things and respect the experience of other folks, I might still get stuff wrong. So I hope if I say something in a way that makes me look like a shithead, y'all will hold me accountable so I can apologize and do it better next time. But we're going to try. Try not to be a shithead. It's the best that anybody can do. So in most tabletop role-playing games, there isn't a lot of nuance in the way that disability is presented. Generally, the kinds of disability that we see in games are either the product of maiming or mutilation by way of combat, or they're choices made during character creation. If your character is struck blind in combat with a wizard, or loses a limb to an enemy weapon, this is the game making a punitive move, right? If you had successfully navigated the encounter, your character wouldn't be in the position that they're in. It's your fault, in a way. Right? In this way, disability is immediately placed in a purely negative light, right? You earned your disability by either your bad tactics, your bad fortune, or just your bad choices. Now, this isn't to say that physical disability as the result of a dangerous situation like combat isn't inherently a bad thing, but in most games, it's an absolutely punitive mechanic, which can make it very hard to paint it in any other light than bullshit frustration. Right? If the game master in any given game tells us, well, you rolled a 1 and the monster rolled a 20 and I rolled on this table, and that means you lose your right arm, and from now on you'll have a disadvantage on any melee attacks till you learn to use your left arm, and a bunch of other things happen that are punitive mechanically. You are now worse than you were before. Your character sucks more than you did before at all the things that you were doing with your body. It's very hard to see that as anything other than crappy. We're not going to look at that and say, ooh, interesting. Ooh, I can do something interesting with this. If we look at disability as a choice in character creation, which is to say a player choice, we often find games with point buy systems that offer us a discount if our character is blind, deaf, or otherwise disabled. So maybe if we want an extra level or two in guns, we could be like, okay, well, I don't need both eyes. so I can get a discount. Cool, here we go. Which can lead to a really awful problem where, like, everybody in the party has some glaring but not so bad disability so they can shore up elsewhere. This is how you end up with parties where it's like, well, I have one arm and you have no legs and he's blind, and it's so that we can all be really cool at stuff that has nothing to do with those things. This kind of zero-sum character creation really, really does a disservice, I think, to folks who are struggling with disability in real life, because the whole model is kind of fucked, right? Like, if you live in a world built for able-bodied people and you're in a wheelchair, say, for whatever reason, dealing with inaccessible locations and generally frustrating body shittiness on top of whatever other strain your disability places on your mental and social health, and then GURPS comes along and says, well, hey, at least you got 12 extra character points, so you must be extra smart or funny or good at swords, right? Because everyone's the same. We all get 100 character points to make our characters. So if you get extra points for being right? Now, I know that game choices, mechanical game choices, are made to balance mechanics, and that there are mechanical penalties that come along with that. It's not that you just get free points. These mechanical penalties get levied against disabled characters to, like, pay for those points, but life is not a zero-sum game, right? Now, think about the media in this way, too. It's full of, like, that idea where if you are disabled in one way, sight being a really common one, some other thing in your life is boosted. Like, you're suddenly a kick-ass martial artist, or your hearing, or your smell. I'm Daredevil. I'm talking about Daredevil, but, you know, this goes back deep into our media representation of disabled people. This idea that, like, you lose one thing and you get great at something else. And that's just kind of a fucked up representation of those things. I think it's frustrating because if your character has a degenerative muscle disease and you lose a bunch of physical stat points, but hey, more points for psychic powers, right? It's just not, that's not how it works. If we're being realistic about things, and I know that realism is a dangerous term to throw around when we talk about role-playing games, having a disability just sucks when the world is arranged for people who are not like you, in ways that aren't clearly just about you particularly. So, if in role-playing games we gained nothing by taking disabilities for our characters, nobody would ever take them. And guess what? People don't choose to be disabled in real life either. Part of what I think designers intend when they include things like, say, mental or physical disabilities as mechanical penalties in exchange for character points is this unspoken idea that the GM will somehow represent their disability in the narrative as being complicating or difficult, right? Well, I can't think of a game that specifically has principles or guidelines around instructing the GM to portray a world built for able-bodied people. I have to hope that the designers thought about this stuff, because rules create narrative. Then again, it's possible that people who make games consider mostly that being in a wheelchair will just cut your movement rate, and that's that. Rather than, like, acknowledging that there's social stigma and other difficulties present in the world around disability. You know, the badass one-armed swordsman who fights better than the two-armed swordsman is fine because, you know, one-armed swordsman got more points to spend, and hey, just use a one-handed weapon, right? Boost that katana skill. We never really see one-armed swordsman, tough guy, badass struggle with everyday tasks because the world is engineered for folks with two hands, right? This is where that whining of, oh, I don't want real-world difficulty in my RPGs comes up again. I don't think there are many RPGs that handle disability well, which is to say a way where the balance isn't zero-sum and where disabilities aren't just punitive combat-related consequences. And I know that I sound like a broken record, but honestly, I think Burning Wheel has a pretty good and well-integrated system for this. In Burning Wheel, disabilities like blindness, loss of limbs, etc. are handled in the same way as all other traits. You pay for them with character points. or you get them through play. So in Burning Wheel, instead of being rewarded for choosing to literally and mechanically cripple your character, you have to pay for it. The reason is that all of the traits that exist in the game exist there inside a reward structure to challenge you as a player to show the ways that your traits complicate your life. Traits are costed according to their impact. The traits that give you huge benefits, like being able to cast spells, cost you a ton of points and give you according mechanical advantages. Traits that hinder your character, which is to say set them apart in a serious way, are most likely to create complications in your life and thus are more expensive. And the reason for this is that even players like me, who are able-bodied and mostly ignorant about what it's like to be disabled, can pretty easily think of a bunch of ways to make our character, who is blind, have a rough time of things because of it. There are more opportunities for challenge, thus creating more complicated experience, meaning more reward by way of Artha as we play the game. And I think that this is interesting because it forces us as players to acknowledge that being disabled is a marginalizing factor in people's lives. It sets people apart in a way that can be humiliating, dangerous, difficult, or frustrating. It creates tension in the narrative, which is what Burning Wheel wants. Now, this is all the opinion and belief of a person who doesn't live with this stuff. So I would love to hear what someone living with a disability thinks of that portrayal. But from my admittedly privileged position, it seems like a step in the right direction, in that the inclusion into the fiction that it creates tends towards analysis and acknowledgement of this thing, of the disability, as more than just a mechanical annoyance. If what we want is to portray characters with disabilities in a way that is respectful and illustrate something about them, or just to broaden our ideas of including different types of people in our game, we have to treat those people's experiences with respect, showing how their disability is an element of their person. In a similar way that race and gender are impactful elements of a person's identity, disability can be as well. It's part of who these characters are. So I don't know, do you know any other RPGs that handle disability well? Or are inclusive of characters whose bodies don't fit into a normative able-bodied ideal, either mechanically or narratively or both? I'd love to hear about them. So, again, kind of a blind spot for me, this stuff, but I've certainly been thinking about it more, and I wanted to share some of those thoughts. Let's get to our first question, shall we?
Hi Adam, JP or Fatarius here. I've been searching around for a new group lately, trying out a lot of pilot sessions, and I'm getting real tired of prepping some premises, getting excited and invested before the session, and even more so during and after, and then never hearing from anyone involved with the thing I prepped for and invested in again. I've got more stillborn campaigns than I care to remember at this point, so my question is, what's a good low-prep, low-explanation game or way to do games for role-playing first dates, so to speak? How can I limit investment so that I don't feel so disappointed when prospective groups are non-starters? Thanks for your time and have a good one.
Dear Adam, how could I get my RPG freak on without falling in love? XO Fotarius. I think the first thing here is choosing the correct game. If you're sick of having to put in the prep and getting burned after the first session, you're going to need to start there. The real serious way to do this is just go GMless. Try playing Fiasco, Microscope, Fall of Magic, Durance, Shock, Quiet Year, etc., etc., etc. All of those games will free you up from having to do any prep at all because there's nobody there to do the prep. If there is no game master, there can be no person responsible for prep. This way, you're not in a position to have to worry about it being a situation where you've put a bunch of time in and the game doesn't go anywhere. These games are the ultimate RPG hookups. You can love them and you can leave them. The only risk here is that you can use these games to find out if a group is right for you, but you can't really continue these games from there. Most of them, if you play them as they are designed for very short experiences. They are one-shot games. These are The old in and out, and then you're done, right? This is not about building deep, meaningful relationships with your role-playing games. So there is that risk there that you're forcing yourself by playing some of these games to only have that one experience. You can also play more traditional games that support totally winging it, but you have to be familiar enough with the system to teach it quickly. You have to have been to this rodeo before. A good one-shot game ought to be able to do character creation in 40 minutes or so, maybe an hour, and give you a good understanding of the game in a few more hours and have a satisfying experience even if you never play again. My go-to on this, and you can see me doing this over and over when I am called on to do an emergency one-shot, is the award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World. But to be completely honest, this is just about any of the Powered by the Apocalypse game. They can be played with exactly zero prep and very little explanation as long as you've played the game or at least read and understood the game in advance. GMing moves in these games are simple. You just do what feels like the right thing narratively according to the principles and agenda of play. Player moves and rules are contained pretty much entirely in the playbooks and basic move handouts, so you don't need to read the book to play it, and there are very rarely any complex mechanical systems to explain. Apocalypse World, Dungeon World, and Monster Hearts are all great zero prep games once you're comfortable with the way that they work, but they also expand into larger campaigns real easy. So, you can play these games in the hit it and quit it style, but you can also hit it and then re-hit it and continue to hit it and then get married to it and have babies with it. All of this, they're great one-shot games that tend to flow into more long-running campaigns. You can see me do this, right? With Roll20 Presents, we did a one-shot of Apocalypse World, and we loved it so much, we were like, no, we're going to keep playing. And we made a campaign out of it. I felt pretty good about the amount of prep that I had to do for Tales from the Loop, for example. And I could definitely foresee Tales from the Loop dropping to zero prep if I played it a few more times. Right? Blades in the Dark, a little harder to be zero prep, but I think it's possible. The one shot that I did, the only prep for Roll20Con, the one shot that we did, the only prep that I did was character creation. Like Apocalypse World, most of the mechanisms in Blades in the Dark for the characters, for the players, are on their sheet. And the rest of the mechanics are so simple as to require a single explanation. What all these games have in common is what Luke Crane would call the situation that is emergent from character creation. Like, if you make characters in a crew in Blades, and by the time you're done, you don't already have 6 or 7 immediate ideas for a job jumping out at you, you fucked up. Or you just don't know Blades that well, right? Don't let me be mean to you about this. It's possible that you're just not comfortable enough with Blades. What you want to do is look at a game in which the process of building characters allows you to play the game as soon as you're done with character creation. I think that Fate or Fate Accelerated might be good for you too, but I find those games so utterly group dependent that I'm not sure I would want to play with total strangers. Like, I kind of think the only reason that I like Nebula Jazz as much as I do is because it's Fate combined with the people that I'm playing it with, which in your case tend to be strangers because you're looking for a new group. So maybe disregard what I just said. Fate is good, but it might not be good for you. You're going to want to avoid any game that's going to require either a lot of prep, so like every variation of Dungeons and Dragons, or games that require a lot of work mechanically, like Burning Wheel, or God forbid that you try to play a game that does both. Hi, Shadowrun. Save those games for groups that earn them. Seriously, even though I love the kind of games that make the absolute most of a long, crunchy, deep, complex 50-session experience, I won't suggest them to a group until I know that they've earned the time and energy that I'm going to have to put into those games. Honestly, I love the idea of both like first date game sessions where we just hang out a little and get to know each other, and the idea that there are specific games that might work well for this. What I like even more is the idea of a game where you can figure out things like what kind of game style do we like, or what kind of stories do we like to tell, or what kind of role players are we, or how complicated do we like our rules. But I don't think a game whose core purpose is to create a single session environment to help players better understand whether they'll fit together as a group exists. I don't think that game is. So I don't know, you can have that one, fledgling designers. Go make a game that will teach us those things. Here's the thing. You don't want to give up that sweet, sweet, mechanically complicated 50-session cherry to some rando, do you? You have to protect the real goods, right? Play games that are light. Play GM-less games. Play games that let you fuck around a little. And then when you found that group you really love, that's when you give up the weird stuff, all right? Don't do the weird stuff on the first date, kids. I mean, unless you want to. I don't care. Don't listen to me. What do I know?
Hey Adam, I'm running a modified 5e thing with one player, that being my little sister, and I'm running into this problem where I can't seem to get her to move short of me narratively moving her. Now, I know running a game with one person is stupid, but, short of cattle prod or any other option, which I don't have, how do you suggest I convince my player to move of their own accord and want to do things and explore the world, because I work hard on it?
I love how honest Iron Ulysses is in this question, right? Like, yes, I get it. I'm doing a stupid thing, and I want to cattle prod my little sister, and she doesn't want to move, and I want her to move because of me. I don't give a shit about her. So I'm going to be honest with you, Iron Ulysses, in respect of your weird stuff. Make your world less boring. Seriously. I mean, I'm only kind of kidding. The system here doesn't really matter because 5e and games adjacent to it, they don't super care where your adventure takes place. Maybe you're missing out on the whole journey to Mount Doom mechanical joy of overland travel, but honestly, and I think you know this, you don't give a fuck what your sister wants. You just want your player to visit this place because you made it, and goddammit, they're going to see your prep, right? Clearly, though, the game doesn't give a shit, and your player sounds like she's having fun where she is, so maybe you should just reconsider all this effort you're putting into these other places that nobody gives a fuck about. Spend the time and energy that you're wasting on where the campaign already is, right? That way you're not blowing your energy on bullshit that doesn't actually exist because it doesn't impact your narrative. Alternately, find the stuff that your player is interested in and put it somewhere else. Surely she's not purely interested in the current locale because of your florid descriptions of the architecture, right? There's a situation here. A story is being told wherein this particular location matters. So put that MacGuffin somewhere else, right? The ring needed to go to Mount Doom. Ned Stark was summoned to King's Landing. Princess Leia isn't sitting around on her ass on Tatooine. She's out there in space. Go and fucking get her, stupid. Location is a backdrop. Setting is part of situation. So use the other stuff you have at hand to create narrative incentive to travel, but do so for the right reason. If you are forcing your character, your sister's character, to go to Elphistan because you're sick of Dwarfsburg, and you stayed up until 5 a.m. drinking Mountain Dew and detailing elfish songs, you're motivated backwards. Your sister has a priority to stay where she's at. Don't try to move her somewhere she doesn't want to go. And if you're real sick of where things are at, it might be time to spice it up for your own sake. Bring the fight to Dwarfberg. Maybe it's time to bring the cool things you've created to town. Ultimately, players are going to go where the interesting shit is. So if Throndir won't go to the adventure, it's time to bring the adventure to Throndir. This question sounds to me like a frustrated GM trying to avoid being a railroading dick. And for that, I salute you. It's good that you're trying to avoid saying, you go here. But if your character, if your sister's character here refuses to go anywhere, there must be a reason, right? Try to find out what that is. Why is that character in one place instead of wandering around? So I think the thing is here, you're getting bored and you're getting frustrated because you've made some cool stuff you want to show off, but you can't lure your player to go look at it. The two of you have cross purposes here. And what you need to do is just find out what about the game is fun for both you and your player, and then just do that. Just do that thing. Find the overlap. Also, can I just say this before we move on? These are short questions. I'm going to say this before I move on. Playing a campaign with one player, it's not, despite what you say, it's not stupid. It's playing 5e with one player that's stupid.
Adam. I'm hacking D&D 5e because I want to make it let my group tell more compelling stories through character-driven play. Yes, I should probably just play Burning Will or Torchbearer, but you and Steven tricked me into becoming a game designer, so, in my naivete I like the challenge. My question, which is inspired by Office Hours episode 18 question 2, is this: how would you make D&D 5e into a goal-based, as opposed to a CR-based, reward structure? How would your mechanic work? Would you mirror Shades 5e by awarding XP for achieving the goals of role-playing according to one's belief, instinct, and goal? Would you sort of Burning Will 5e by rewarding XP to players achieving their 3 goals derived from their 3 beliefs? Or would you make it more like Stars Without Number? My answer to Jared's questions. What is your game about? Medieval fantasy characters pursuing their goals, which can often include dungeon fucking. How is it about that? Rules that allow players to set and pursue their own goals, especially with combat and magic, and that respond to these goals via the GM's principles. How does it reward that? When characters achieve their goals, they are rewarded with experience points that enable leveling. Relevant info about leveling: characters in 5e level roughly every 5 sessions when playing 1 hard and 2 easy combat encounters per session, so you might design your goal-based system around this leveling rhythm. I recognize some of the possible disjunctions here: players better at goal achieving leveling more quickly, the party fucking up their synergistically balanced combat potency by splitting up to pursue their disjoint goals, classes heavily oriented toward combat pursuing non-combat scenes. I'm hoping you'll point out some more problems and hint at directions I could pursue to solve these problems. Thank you, Cutie, for sharing with us the joy of RPGs.
So I've never been hit on by a robot before. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Thank you very much. All right, robot. You're a smart robot. Schmenry via the robot. Very eloquent. Thank you for using the phrase dungeon fucking in your robot voice. That's great. I am so about that. I love when people submit questions, people and people bots submit questions where they kind of like know that the answer is there already. It makes me so happy, but I'm going to talk this one through. The question, well thought out and excellently delivered, is not actually as simple as it sounds. I think one of the core failings of the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and it has many, but one of the core failings of the DMG is that it thinks you can just swap out elements of D&D without having to retool anything else. I've talked before about how, to me, milestone experience feels unsatisfying, and goal-based XP is basically the same with milestones set by players. The less granular an experience system is, the less control the players feel like they have over it. If I sat down at the table and the GM said to me, just play the game, I will give you XP whenever I feel like you have achieved a story goal, I will immediately then fall back on the next thing that is a priority. If I cannot control my experience in Dungeons and Dragons, I can't now earn experience on my own. I have to just avoid the things instead that will kill me, which makes the game... You remember how frustrating the beginning, maybe you don't, maybe you haven't watched it, but the beginning arc of Court of Swords was, when the players weren't comfortable with the game and they were a little afraid and they would back off of everything. Now imagine, you notice in that they didn't get any experience because they never encountered monsters or never stuck around to fight them. Imagine if that was the whole game. There's no reason to get in fights if you're getting milestone experience, or God fucking forbid per session experience. You just show up, you don't do anything, because if you do anything, you risk dying, and then you just wait until XP falls in your lap. Or you try to find other ways to accomplish your milestones or goals, which is what the problem really is here. Because in Dungeons and Dragons, I can say, I want to unite the 12 kingdoms and win the love of Prince Prissy-Pants. And you can tell me as my dungeon master, that's a goal worth 69,000 experience. But when it comes down to it, I just don't have the tools to win the love of Prince Prissy-Pants and unite the 12 kingdoms. Seriously, look at the action words in that sentence. Unite kingdoms, win love. And like, if Dungeons and Dragons were a parser-based adventure game, we would get syntax error. I'm sorry, I don't know how to win love. I'm Dungeons and Dragons. What I mean here is that you can't just swap out the things players are rewarded for without also giving them the tools that they need to get those fucking things, right? Asking a player to create a self-motivated goal that doesn't involve killing the shit out of everything is asking them to build a church with a handgun. It's very, very difficult. Easier, in fact, to just go out and find a church that's already been built and fucking take it away from the current owners because you've got a gun and they don't. So the situation here isn't just about dangling an alternate reward in front of players to get them to change their play style, but about altering the entire motivation structure of the game. I think if you did goals in Dungeons and Dragons, you would have to be like, write a goal about a place you want to explore, or write a goal about a treasure you want to obtain, or write a goal about a thing you want to just lacerate to death. You need to make it such that the goals are already in line with D&D's toolset. Murder and chaos by sword and spell. It's actually really unfair to give the players the opportunity to write a goal that isn't achievable, either in the fiction or the mechanics of the game. This would be like encouraging a player to write a belief in Burning Wheel about inventing an orbital gun platform. There are no tools in Burning Wheel for inventing orbital gun platforms. It's simply impossible. So the goal system has to reflect what the game is capable of doing. I mean, yes, I could definitely write, I will unite the 12 kingdoms as a goal for Dungeons and Dragons. But that would mean that my uniting, based purely on what's on my character sheet, my uniting would involve 90% murder fucking and like about 10% persuade checks. So I guess, if that's okay with you, go ahead and do it. Work out the math of how fast you want people to progress. Use that to determine session for goal XP value. Let them play. Mark every session they actively pursue their goal, and when they achieve it, give them the appropriate amount of experience points. Keep in mind, though, that in D&D, where level really fucking matters, versus, say, Stars Without Number, where it barely matters, you're going to have to either guide your players or systematize a guide into making realistic goals. A goal like, I will totally fuck up a dragon, is a shit goal for a first level character. It is impossible. No first level character, by the mechanisms of Dungeons and Dragons, will ever be able to kill a dragon on their own, right? However, looking at a game like Stars Without Number, kill Mr. Titan isn't so impossible for a first level Stars Without Number character. So you have to be aware of what the characters can do using only the mechanisms of the game. Now, I know narratively you could trick a dragon into dunking their head in magma. You could trick the dragon into flying into the sun. I don't know. There's lots of ways you could RP around this, but the game doesn't give you the tools you need to do this. Everything in 5e is based on a set of progressive mathematical steps. Monsters require a certain amount of potency to defeat. Potency requires leveling by way of investment of time, etc. Now, Stars Without Numbers goal system is actually not the primary way to obtain XP in that game. In Stars Without Number, it's a secondary method for getting XP because the primary XP comes from accomplishing missions, from doing jobs so that fictionally you can pay off your ship and keep on living. The goal system in Stars Without Number is a lot like directives in the Sprawl. There's a main set of GM-based mission XP paired up with a handful of personal things set to complicate missions when they're pursued. Worrying about shit like party level imbalance or class imbalance or those things you mentioned in your question is really just dramatically jumping the gun. Because first you have to do all this other groundwork. And I suppose what I'm woefully getting at here is that if you asked me to do it, I wouldn't do what you're trying to do. D&D just doesn't have the equipment to care about your character's personal goals above and beyond, say, inspiration mechanisms. The assumed goal in Dungeons & Dragons is XP gain by way of overcoming physically dangerous enemies with a secondary reward economy of gold. If you were to staple beliefs, instincts, and goals to it, you'd find that, just like Mirror Shades, the game would eventually be barely using D&D at all for anything, and honestly, there's a lot more in even Shadowrun First Edition for a character to be about than there is in Dungeons & Dragons. Plus, I know a lot of folks really liked Mirror Shades, and damn, I sure did too, but as a game design concept, it was a fucking shit show. Please, please don't use Mirror Shades as an example of how to change a game system around. Mirror Shades is my ultimate do as I say, not as I do thing, because at the beginning of the game, I was too inexperienced with the group and fundamentally too lazy, really, to know that I should have just built a new thing from the ground up using, like, mouse guard. And hindsight is 20/20, but if you watched Mirror Shades, or really anything else that has managed to trick you into becoming a game designer, and this is what you want, it's time to design a different game. 5e is too hard to hack back to what you want it to be. Do not trust the Dungeon Master's Guide. You cannot simply create a new experience system and then just screw it into D&D and hope that it'll work. If you want medieval fantasy characters pursuing their goals, you need to take 5th edition D&D and hurl it into the trash. And as you said, just play Torchbearer. But if you don't like Torchbearer, make your own thing. Honestly, that's what I do, because everything that you're going to try and do with 5e requires a redesign from a deeper place then I think is worth going to. Girl, D&D ain't never going to be the man you want him to be. You can't fix him. Find yourself an RPG who's going to do you right. And then just be a big old RPG slut like me and just use games to get what you want and play like 5 of them a week. Good question. Hard answer though, because really like it's tough to say like just cut it out. Like just do a fucking different thing. But also don't. Right? Start with D&D and try to build something different, but start way deeper than you are. You're trying to get at the inside from the outside. Start at the bottom. Really understand what D&D is trying to be about, and then find places where you can fuck with that. But this is going to be a labor of love, and I feel like maybe you don't need to love Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe there's other RPGs out there for you. So thanks for coming. This has been episode 55. Little bonus question, a bunch of shorties and a bonus question. You can contribute to Office Hours. You can get me to answer your questions by going to www.office-hours.com. Nope. God, I really need that domain. I keep saying that. Go to www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. Submit your question, and I'll answer it for you. I'm going to be back next week. The rest of July is going to be business as usual. So I'll be back next week with more Office Hours. We got episode 56 coming up at the usual time. And we will see you then. So thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye.